Good morning again, everyone, and welcome to Crossroads. I'm Reed, and if we haven't met, I'm so glad that you're here to worship with us this morning. Can I just say an addendum to what Katie talked about in terms of the community center? You need no skills to go help them, because I showed up and they put me to work. All I had to do was put a trash can on my head and walk up and down, and the kids threw balls in the thing. So literally, you don't need any skills to do that. So you're deputized as volunteers. So there you go. You could see Steph and Katie afterwards. That was the Doolies on the video there, and they are just one of the many stories that we're hearing about how God is using this journey that we've called Breakthru in the lives of people in our church. And the cool thing is, all the stories aren't about money. The stories are about families, and they're about marriages, and they're about faith. There's people who have started come to a class. They didn't plan on coming to church, but then they met people and they've started coming to church. And maybe that's you. And so welcome. We are so glad that you're here. God is doing something, and we're glad to be a part of it. Now, this series of messages, as Kevin just said, this is number 3 in the series. So if you're just starting, let me catch you up quickly. We started with trying to identify the goal for the whole series of talks, to be as simple as we could about what are we trying to accomplish here with these set of messages. And it was this: we want to learn how to honor God with everything that we have. That's as simple as I can make it. It's not easy, but it's simple. How can we honor God with everything that we've got? That's not a percentage thing. That's an all thing. It's not a giving thing. It's a living thing. And that's what we're trying to learn together. But we wanted to make it very practical. And so last week, in week 2, we started by saying, let's look at 2 very specific circumstances that many of us find ourselves in when it comes to our money and our stuff. And so last week, this situation, the circumstance that we picked was, what happens when you find yourself with not enough money? Which it turns out a lot of people have found ourselves in that, and related to that. And what that sometimes means is that we deal with debt. We actually make ourselves slaves, and we talked about how that affects our lives and our faith and our families. And I shared that the cause of that, in my life anyway, was deeper than dollars and cents. It had to do with self-control, had to do with contentment. And so I challenged you and challenged me to take a look at what that situation is revealing in our lives. This morning, I want to talk about the second very specific circumstance when it comes to your money and your stuff. Here's the circumstance, okay? We're going to talk about those times, those circumstances when you have more than enough money. Did you hear that? It was silence in the room. Dead silence. Why? Because, no kidding, I want to talk about your extra money today, okay? See, nothing. And I know why. I was going to ask you to raise your hand if you've got extra money, but I'm not going to do that. I thought about doing that, but I'm not going to do that because no one here would raise your hand. For 2 reasons. Most of you wouldn't raise your hand because you think that's the dumbest question I've ever heard. Extra money. Who has extra money? Like, you're in the wrong building, buddy. This is the wrong audience. We go to church in a Tractor Supply building. You got to, come on, go find a fancy church and ask that question or something like that. And so you wouldn't raise your hand. You're like, that's a silly question. Nobody has extra money. But then there's others of you in the room. When I say I'm going to talk about your extra money, you're like, I know I have extra money, but I am not raising my hand because all those people are going to judge me for having extra money. And you're right, they would. They go, I hate that guy, yeah. Right? So here's the truth. The truth is, most of us have some extra money. Now, we don't think about it like that. That's not the way it registers in our minds. And also, that's not the most important truth that I want you to remember today. Here's the most important truth that I want you to remember today, is that what you do with that extra money reveals something about your heart. And you may not even be aware of it. In fact, Jesus said that the choices that you make and I make with our extra reveals whom we trust, who we belong to, what we believe in. So, come on. What if the choices that you're making with money that you don't think you have is revealing something that you believe that you would swear you don't believe. Wouldn't you want to know that? Some of you are like, nope. Do not want to know that. Yes, you do. You really do. And this is what I want for you. I want for all of us to understand what's really going on in our hearts and our relationship with God. So I want to tell you what Jesus said about this. Because Jesus revealed on this topic a question that almost no one ever asks, that we should ask. He reveals a condition that I'm telling you, hardly any of us think we have. He reveals a belief that I'm telling you, you'll swear you don't believe it. And then he has a name for people who deny all of those things. And you don't want to be called that name. And I want you to hear that this morning. So I want you to hear what Jesus said. But first, I have to convince you that he's talking to you, because you've already decided he's not talking to you. So just bear with me for a second. I'm going to convince you. We're going to start here. Most of us have some extra money. Let me tell you why I say that. I'm going to give you some fill in the blanks, right? So you don't have to tell anybody the answers to this quiz. You just keep track at home and you keep score for yourself. And I'm going to give you you might have some extra money if blank, right? It's like you might be a redneck if, that Foxworthy thing. This is you might have some extra money if, okay? So here, I got my little list here. You might have some extra money if you've been to the movies lately. Anybody been to the movies lately? I go to the movies a lot. I go mostly on my day off, and I usually go to the matinee $6 movie in Hanover, and because there's never anybody there, and nobody knows me, and I wear my hat, and I go in. I don't watch like bad movies, but I just go and don't talk about it. I just realized that sounds bad. I don't know. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is that even if it's $6, I have some extra. I've chosen what to do with my extra money. Andy Stanley says it this way: once you eat every day and live indoors, the rest is extra, right? You just don't think about it like that. Okay, you might have some extra money. You say, I don't go to movies. Do you pay for Netflix or Amazon Prime? No, wait. There's nothing wrong with that. Can we get that clear? Nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying you have some extra, and that's what you choose to do with it. All right, some of you are like, still didn't get me. If you've bought anything in the past year from a Starbucks, you've got extra money. It's $6 for a coffee. You chose to do it. There's nothing, well, maybe there is something wrong with that. But anyway, you get the point. All right, a couple more. If you have a cell phone, you've got some extra. There's nothing wrong with having a cell phone. If you have a car, do you realize how far up the socioeconomic ladder that places you in the world if you have a car or 2 cars or 3 cars? Some of you have seasonal clothing. You have a little extra. Some of you wear multiple outfits every day. You got your workout clothes, you got your work clothes, you got your relaxing clothes, you got your church. So for some of you, I get it. It's all the same. And your wife's like, come on already. Upgrade. If you have you just keep track now, okay? You don't have to share it with anybody. If you have a house that has an extra room just in case somebody comes over to stay, that nobody stays in, called a guest room, you have some extra. You've chosen what to do with that. Some of you have a guest room for your car. It's called a garage, right? And you can't get your car in your garage because why? You got too much extra stuff. And so you go and you rent another extra storage place from some guy so that you can get your car in its guest room. Why am I saying all that? No guilt. I'll say that maybe 3 more times this morning. This is not about making anyone feel guilty. That's not what it's about. I just want you to see you probably have some extra, and you don't usually think about it like that. And Jesus is going to tell us some really important stuff about our extra, and I want you to listen. I don't want you to opt out right off the beginning. So the truth is, most of us have some extra, and we're so used to it that we feel financial stress when we have a little less extra than we used to have, or less extra than somebody else. Then we feel this stress. But Jesus reveals that we should be asking this question that I'm telling you, hardly anyone ever asks. The question is this. Do you want to hear the question? Here it is. Why do I have extra? You ever asked that? Jim, you ever asked that question? I didn't. Kevin, you ever asked that question? Yeah, me neither. She's like, nah, I never asked that question. Jesus says, here's a really important question for you to ask. Why do I have any extra? Why is that? Now, our culture does not encourage us to ask that question, does it? The question that our culture encourages us to ask is what? Why don't I have more? And I'm great at that question. I'll give you an example. We had some friends who had a house. They have a house. Actually, they have two houses in Duck. You ever been to Duck? It's in the Outer Banks, beautiful place. And Duck is a place where there are a lot of extra houses, right? People don't actually live there. They have extra houses. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with having an extra house. Nothing. I hope you have one. I hope you invite me to it, which is what happened. And so they invited us to go for Thanksgiving to one of their extra houses. It was awesome. So we had our whole family in the last two Thanksgivings. We've met there in Duck and just had a great time. Now, there's not a lot of people there in November, but it's still pretty nice. And we were walking outside and walking, looking at all these beautiful houses. I mean, they're just beautiful, and the beach and neighborhood is awesome. And do you know I'm walking around there, and this never crossed my mind. I wonder why I have so much. That never crossed my mind. What was crossing my mind? Why don't I have one of these? Which one would I pick if I have I'm smarter than that guy. Why does he have an extra house? Come on, you do the same thing. Here's the problem. See, when we're focused on the question, why don't I have more? It makes our hearts vulnerable. Can you see why? Because when I'm focused on why don't I have more, when I happen to get more, I always assume it's for whom? Me. I never, ever stop to ask, why do I have extra? No, because I'm focused on what I don't have. So when I get a little more, I go, well, I'm closer. You're like, what's wrong with that? Jesus calls it greed. Now, if there's a condition that no one in the room thinks that they have, here it is. All the greedy people, raise your hands. They're like 4 of you, great. They're like, I see where this is going. Let me just get it over with, right? No one thinks that you're greedy. But here's the way, can I tell you? Here's the way Jesus defines it. Jesus says greed is assuming the extra is for you. Just assuming that the extra is for you. That's what greed is. And he could not be more clear on how destructive that is in our lives. But you don't even think you're struggling with it. Me either. I'm just walking up and down Duck going, why can't I have one of those? Why can't I have one of those? I want you and me to hear what Jesus says that's doing to our hearts. So I want to share with you his words. For us. For who? Us. Yeah, not somebody else with all the money. For us. Okay? It's in Luke chapter 12. And so if you want to turn there, we're going to be reading parts of Luke chapter 12, this amazing encounter that Jesus has with some people that are listening to his teaching. But let me set the stage, because what prompts this teaching is a guy from the crowd who comes up to Jesus with a complaint. And he says, hey, Jesus, tell my tightwad brother to give me more money, and he's not sharing the inheritance correctly. It's unfair. He's keeping too much of it. Which, isn't that what we all think? Like, this does not have anything to do with the message. This is a public service announcement. We usually overestimate what people owe us and underestimate what we owe other people. It's just true. And that's not the message. We'll keep going. So this guy is all cranked up, and he comes to Jesus and says, tell my tightwad brother to give me more money. Listen to how Jesus responds. This is Luke chapter 12, starting in verse 15. Then he, that would be Jesus, said to them, watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. To which the dude who's asking the question is, wait, not me. You should be telling that to my brother. Jesus said, no, I'm warning you. Wow. And then this doozy. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. Let's read it out loud, full voice, that one line. Would you do it with me? Life does not consist in an abundance of... Do you believe that? Of course you believe that. Who doesn't believe that? Of course you believe that. Intellectually, we all believe that. Not one of you would say, yes, I think my life consists of, I think my life equals, I think my life is made up of all my money. And you wouldn't say that. Of course you believe that. Do you live like you believe that? Probably not. Probably struggle like I do. Here's the point. Jesus is saying, you might believe something that you'll swear you don't believe. And you can tell. And he's going to help us. So Jesus is a master teacher. Because his crowd would have the same response as our crowd. When Jesus says, I think you believe life consists in the abundance of its possessions. We will all go, no, I don't. They do the same thing. So you know what Jesus does? He's a great teacher. He doesn't get in their face and go, you're clueless and delusional. He doesn't do that. You know what he does? He goes, let me tell you a story. And I want you to hear the story. Because when we listen to it, it might start to sound familiar. The master teacher lets us see our own stuff. So here's the story. Verse 16. It's called a parable. It's just a fancy name for a story about a point about God. And Jesus tells this story. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns, and I'll build bigger ones, and there I'll store my surplus grain. I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. Now there's a plan for you. That a good plan? Yeah. And what do we learn here? Now Jesus is making this story up. You with me? This didn't happen, actually. Jesus is making up characters to make a point. And so the character that he makes up, that the whole thing revolves around, is a rich guy. Now, this is not a trick question. Does Jesus say there's anything wrong with being a rich guy? No. No, not at all. He's already rich, and then what happens? He gets richer. Yeah. He gets extra. He gets more extra than he had before. His barns were full, and now he's got more than that extra. And does Jesus say there's anything wrong with that? No. Nothing wrong with the rich guy, nothing wrong with him getting richer. And apparently, Jesus says it was because of the ground that he got richer. It wasn't even in his control. So the rich guy gets richer, and Jesus is making a point. And he's saying there's nothing wrong with that. But when he gets the extra, what does he do? Same thing he's always done. That's interesting. In other words, more doesn't change him. More just makes him more of what he already was. He makes the same decision that he's always made when he got extra. What does he not do? He never asks this question. Why do I have extra? He assumes all the extras for me. That makes him what? Greedy, according to Jesus. And that's a problem of his heart, not his money. And so he does the same thing he's always done. And don't miss this point. More doesn't make you any different than you are. It just makes you more of what you are. So I know you think, well, if I had more, I'd be more? No, you wouldn't. You just be more what you are. It doesn't give you new priorities. It doesn't give you new assumptions about life. It doesn't change you. It doesn't change him. So he decides to keep it all. And then Jesus says, here's his mindset. He lets us know the guy's thoughts. The guy thinks, and I read it to you in verse 19 there, then I'll have, after I do this plan, I'll have plenty of grain for plenty of years. And he was half right. He had plenty of grain. He just didn't have plenty of years. And the truth is, he didn't control either of them. He didn't own the grain or the years. And that leads to this name-calling business, right? I know that you tell your kids, don't call people names, but Jesus did, so what are you going to do? Verse 20. God said to him, you're a fool. This very night, your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you've prepared for yourself? So you got plenty of grain, you just don't have plenty of years. and you have not asked the question, not seen this condition, refused to think that you believe this. That makes you a fool, God says. Now, the people listening to Jesus tell this story will go, whoa, 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 whoa. That guy's not a fool. He's a genius. Their lens, and maybe ours, from which we look at our lives and judge whether God is pleased with us or not, usually has to do in their agricultural society on how good your crops are. This guy's got great crops. And Jesus is saying God thinks he's a fool. And they're like, no, 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 God must be pleased with him. Look, Jesus said, wrong answer. He thinks he's a fool. God thinks this guy is a fool. And to put an exclamation point on that, Jesus has God ask a question to the guy at the end in verse 20. He says this question, who then is going to get all the stuff that you stored up for you? And the answer is, who knows? He won't get to determine that, will he? Because somebody else will get all his extra, but not because he's generous, because he's dead. Right? And Jesus says that's a foolish way to live. Because, here's the conclusion, verse 21. He draws a nice bow on it for us. This is how it will be, how? Like total loss. This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves but is not rich toward God. But is not rich. What does it mean to be rich toward God? That's an odd statement for Jesus to say. Maybe you were here last week at the end of the message about debt. We talked about how sometimes our debt can give us a lens of our spiritual condition. How spiritually we are all in debt up to our eyeballs. There's no way that we're going to pay God what we owe him spiritually. But that the good news was that Jesus paid. Jesus, remember we sang it at the end? Jesus paid it all. And we're filthy rich spiritually. Not like the Benz in the driveway, yacht in the water kind. Spiritually, stuff that no one can take away, that doesn't go away at the end of this life. We are rich. That's what it means to be rich towards God. And Jesus is saying, man, if you miss that, you miss everything. You're a fool if you miss that. And then last piece, I'm going to go all the way back up to the beginning. Because the question that starts the whole dialogue off, Jesus responds to actually very confusingly. Is that a word? Confusingly? Jesus in verse 14, the guy says, got my tightwad brother, tell him to give me more money. Jesus says, man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you? Now, some of the older translations say judge or divider. And Jesus is saying, who says I'm that? Which is bizarre for a number of reasons. One is because he says he's that. In other places in the gospel, he says, I'm the one who judges and I'm the one who divides. So this is a weird answer. He's like, why do you think I'm the judge or the divider? And what's he saying? See, he's saying there, if you come to me asking for anything before you trust me for everything, you don't know me. Jesus is saying, I'm not the one to ask for things that you think will make your life go better. You don't know me then because I'm your life. I'm it. And so don't try to use me to get something that you think will make your life better. Why? Because life doesn't consist in the abundance of your possessions. I know you believe that intellectually. Jesus wants you to believe that practically. Wants you to let him be that person. He doesn't want you to be a fool, or me either. So, here's a review. There's a question that hardly any of us ask. What's the question? Why do I have extra? That reveals a condition that we'd all swear we don't have, greed. Jesus says greed is just assuming the extras for me, which that comes from a belief. The belief is that life consists in the abundance of possessions. And if you believe that, Jesus has a word for you. You're a fool. Does that sound harsh? It feels harsh to me. And so maybe Jesus would say that to some of us in the room today. Maybe he would look at Reed Robinette and he'd say, Reed, you're a fool. And I go, no. God must be pleased with me. Look. He'd go, no, you're a fool. So how do you know? I want to know. I want to know if I'm a fool or not. Well, apparently it's really simple, which I wish it wasn't. I wish it was really complex, because then I could dodge the question, right? But it's not. Apparently you just look at the decisions that you're making with your extra, and it tells you whether you're living foolishly or not. Remember, no one thinks we're greedy. We all think we're generous. So why don't you see? Why don't you just see? You don't have to tell me. You don't tell anybody. Just, you should know, shouldn't you? Well, you just go to the last year, and you go, well, what? How much did I give away? You should at least know. And that won't tell you anything, because the number doesn't mean anything until you go, okay, well then how much did I have? Because that's really when it comes down to it. You know, the average American gives, you know how much? 2%. 2% to charity in a year. The average Christian gives 2%. Same thing. Apparently it doesn't make all that much difference. That says to me, we've missed it. We've missed out on the riches that God has given us. We're in dire need of a heart transplant that gets itself fixed on the real things that give real life. I don't want to miss that. I don't want to walk through life fooling myself that this is what life is when I'm missing it completely. I don't want you to either. So here at the end of this service, that's what we're going to focus on. We're going to focus on receiving. Because God, I'm telling you, nowhere does God ever ask anyone to give anything before they receive. You receive first. And that's what communion is about. Communion is us receiving what we can't get anywhere else because of the death and resurrection of Jesus. And so as we close this service, I want you to receive. I want you to be laser focused on how rich you are spiritually, that might begin to change your heart and mine so that we don't end up being fools. I'm going to invite the worship team to come back up, and I'm going to pray, and then Kevin's going to lead us into communion. Let's pray together. Father, thank you that you reveal truth to me even when I don't want to hear it. Because I do want to know what makes life work. I do want to know how I was built to live. So God, help me, help us to hear your voice. Help us to receive what only you can give us. because of the death and resurrection of your Son. We pray it in his name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thanks, Reed. Appreciate it.